This episode of the Chris Johnston Show is brought to you by Sports Interaction. Get in on the action and make your bet with Sports Interaction, whether it's on the upcoming MLB playoffs or the start to the NHL season. With competitive odds, the best live in play, and more ways to get into the game, you can make your next bet with Sports Interaction. Head to sportsinteraction.com/SDPN or download the app to get started. 19 and over. Please play responsibly. September is here, and it's time to talk about self-care. When it comes to making an impression, proper grooming is essential to looking and feeling your best when you walk into a room. That's why the sponsors of today's show, Manscaped, are committed to helping men around the world walk and talk with some swagger this season with the best grooming tools on the market. Join the 9 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped and enjoy this offer, 20% off plus free shipping with the code CJ Show at manscaped.com. Don't neglect your beautiful self and get right with Manscaped. For the sleekest version of yourself, by the way, Manscaped has you covered from head to toe, starting off with this bad boy, the Beard Hedger Trimmer. Look, I don't have a beard that's as luscious and great as CJ's, but, the smaller beard, this hedger, we get along just fine. With one guard and 20 adjustable lengths, this device is the perfect travel companion to take care of your mane wherever you are, Maine. So get right with that. Also, the Performance Package 4.0 has a lot of great stuff. The Lawnmower 4.0 is in there, the Crop Preserver, groin deodorant, the Crop Reviver groin spray as well is great. The Manscaped Boxers 2.0, great for men of all ages. Enjoy the Performance Package. Once again, Manscaped supports the Chris Johnston Show so much, they provided an exclusive offer for you, the listener or the watcher on YouTube. 20% off plus free shipping with the code CJ Show at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. You just have to use the code CJ Show. Feel like yourself again and take charge of your life with Manscaped.
I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
I promise we will get to hockey on this Monday edition of the CJ Show. It's Ask CJ Day. I know I said we're going to have it last Thursday. Timing wouldn't permit that. We're going to get to questions today. We will get to some news and notes around the Hockey League. Michael Andlauer, now the owner of the Ottawa Senators, some Calgary Flames stuff. But CJ, I would love to know, as I know you, just like myself, enjoy football Sunday. Where were you when you heard about the biggest news of the day, which was the confirmation of a relationship between Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift? I laugh because it's funny how this story has taken the world by storm. Apparently, did you know they announced the Super Bowl halftime show performer in the wee hours of the morning? You might have forgotten about that. Completely swallowed away by Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift dating.
Yeah, I was on my couch in my living room watching the game. I actually have Mahomes and Kelce on my one fantasy team. So if I got a chance to watch the Chiefs play, that's a fun game for me fantasy wise. And so I was extra pumped because I knew as soon as she was there that they were going to find a way to get him a TD in that game. I mean, it's a pretty safe bet anyway, given the way that those two kind of roll. But yeah, what a thing, man! And then it was obviously all over my IG feed. I'm sure the X-Files were lighting up with all that stuff too. I wasn't really on Twitter much yesterday, but yeah, it was. It just made me think, like, what happens if she ever came to an NHL arena? Like, what happens? Because it was you're right, it's such a big story. Like, we're not even going to throw out a potential name of a player because it's not so much important who her partner might be, but like, I mean, I guess maybe it would if it was a frontline, someone might get a little more attention. But imagine Taylor Swift at an NHL game like that. That would go bananas.
I mean, it's not like she's never been to an NHL game. And like, you could even go back in time. There was an ad for tickets done by the Nashville Predators, and Taylor Swift is in the ad. Someone posted, actually, this is another reason why we're doing this segment. A few people sent us Taylor Swift related questions for Ask CJ. And I swear there is a GIF where it's her and I think it's Jimmy Fallon. And Fallon is wearing like an Islanders jersey. And they're like doing some weird little dance in the crowd or something. But like Taylor Swift to hockey, I mean, maybe now, if she shows up now with like Travis Kelce, maybe everyone loses their minds. But like, I don't know. You're right. Maybe it would still would, but it's not as if like it would be this completely new thing for Taylor Swift to show up to hockey. Like I think she likes hockey. I'm inclined to think so.
I mean, I have no idea. But I will say this thing played out so publicly too, right? Like
Yes.
I remember, Travis Kelce talking about trying to get the wristband to her when he went to her concert at Arrowhead a few months ago. And then all of a sudden there's little murmurs that maybe they're together. And then you get the ultimate confirmation. I saw one of the NFL insiders, I wish I remembered which one, said like, I don't even like, are we being punked here? Like no one even knows for sure, I guess, if it's real, but I saw them leaving the stadium together last night on IG or whatever it was. So, and we live in a strange time. I mean, Taylor Swift's probably the biggest celebrity pop figure in the world right now. I mean, based on that tour and all the money, and then Kelce is one of the best NFL players. Obviously, the NFL is the king among North American sports. This is a true power couple.
It's hilarious though to see these two worlds collide. Like there are people, I saw the screenshot from Reddit this week where in the Taylor Swift Reddit, they are debating who the greatest tight end of all time is. I don't know if it was Photoshop or not, but it's funny. Like the worlds are converging. Like I'm sure there are Kansas City fans and football fans who are tapping into Taylor's discography. And there are Taylor Swift fans who are thinking, oh, Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes. What's that duo like? It's hilarious. I think it's hilarious.
Well, and I saw people already saying like, what's their breakup song going to be like? Because we know she's famous for documenting the trials and travails of her love life. Not that I'm predicting a breakup. I don't know. I mean, look, this is way beyond my purview. We're probably like 2 minutes longer on Taylor Swift and Travis Kelce than we should be. But
I get that. But anytime you get to sound like a human on these topics that have nothing to do with your actual purview, that's when gold shows up. So we have to do this. We have to try. We have to try.
Well, I mean, look, they both have crazy lives. It's going to be hard for that relationship to last, just given the demands of their professions and the travel and all that stuff. So maybe she'll be writing a story about like, writing a song about watching the Chicago Bears get their ass kicked one day or something.
If we see the next album, a song titled Travis, we don't need to figure out what that song is about.
Here.
For sure. But I will say this, though. Imagine if, and I'm just like you, I'm not going to put a player there, but if Taylor Swift was dating an NHL player, I'll even add this, in a Canadian market, I imagine what it would be like for PR teams, especially for Canadian teams, having to deal with their player dating a mega superstar. That is like well beyond their, not just jurisdiction, but like beyond their manpower at that point. How would we handle that? Like, would we let that be a big story? We going to is Overdrive going to talk about it and Jeff O'Neill be like, this is a distraction? Because someone's going to do it. Someone would do it.
Oh, I mean, I'm not saying it's O-Dog. I don't know who it would be. And like, we're deep in hypotheticals here, but it would be a big story. And I'm guessing for that PR department, like they wouldn't know what to do. All of a sudden, like People Magazine is putting in like requests for interviews or, you know what I mean? Like all of a sudden you're getting like a different portion of the media conglomerates coming at you for access or for interviews. I mean, we saw a little bit, it's funny, it didn't involve a relationship, but Matthew Tkachuk became sort of a big enough player in last year's playoffs that I saw him getting some sort of attention from the maybe non-traditional hockey media. So it happens a little bit, but I would hope that whoever that was, whatever that was, especially, I mean, look, they clearly want to be public, right? I mean, she didn't have to be at the game, like I feel like they are comfortable with this being kind of what it is. So if it was the same circumstances with a hockey player and that person wasn't looking for privacy, then why not? I mean, they approach it differently, right? Like Morgan Riley's in sort of a Canadian power couple with Tessa Virtue. And it's funny, actually, on the opening day of Leafs training camp, he was asked the question about sort of what he's learned about competition from his partner. And he's like, I don't talk about this much, basically. But he said, needless to say, I've learned a lot. But, the way they've chosen that is they largely keep their business between them. And I think that's fine, too, because they have big social media channels if they wanted to blast it out there. I feel like Taylor and Travis want it blasted. So if it was with a hockey player who wanted that attention, I mean, I don't think we'd be ready for what it would be so strange because we just don't get those kind of stories too often in hockey.
I think we'd almost celebrate that player because they want to make themselves public. They would want to put themselves out there. Like the only other player I could really think of in my time who ever wanted to do anything like that was PK Subban. And now that he's retired, he could just do whatever he wants. But if we had an NHL player today who would willingly, look, I'm sure there are a lot of NHL players who would want to date Taylor Swift, but they would willingly want to engage with the PR machine behind it, where you have to be public in a certain way. Like, we as NHL people would be looking at that player and being like, well, if he wants to be public with this, like, imagine how he might feel about other stuff. And maybe it's not the same thing, but like the idea of an NHL player wanting to be front and center in public, it is something that we would consider strange because NHL players do not have that in their DNA for the most part. You're absolutely right.
And that's where the distraction conversation inevitably would follow in some portion of that team's media, I would think. Just because it is unusual. I mean, way back when, this is a freaking history lesson. We need like a little song for this. But when Wayne Gretzky got together with Janet Jones, now Janet Gretzky, I mean, she was a pretty semi-high profile actress, and they had almost like a royal wedding style wedding. Like it was like broadcast live on television, and I remember crazy dress with like a 30-foot train on it. Like it was a significant event. When those two got together and were quite public. So, I mean, I guess every couple generations it happens. You're right. PK Subban, I'm trying to remember the name of his ex, but she was the skier.
Lindsey Vonn.
Lindsey Vonn, they were pretty public about their relationship. So it does happen from time to time. Mike Comrie and Hillary Duff,
yes.
Once upon a time.
Yes.
So it's not as though it's completely uncharted territory. I guess what it is, though, is right now we're talking about probably the biggest individual celebrity on earth crossing into the sports realm.
Insider J Money asks, describe the Taylor Swift Travis Kelce rumors in NHL terms.
Well, I mean, what do you do? You go to you'd have to be like I guess it would be equivalent to like dating someone on the Tampa Bay Lightning. I'm thinking of a team that's won or been to multiple championships in recent years. So the Lightning might be the closest thing to the Chiefs right now. And then obviously Kelsey's one of their biggest stars. So pick one of the 3 or 4 biggest stars of Tampa that I don't know if any of those people are single and they end up with her. Maybe it's something like that. So
I appreciate you trying.
So yeah, it's like if Nikita Kucherov or something ends up with Braden Point shows up with Taylor Swift. That's probably the closest we could get.
That is pretty good. Someone even asked, like, Taylor needs to buy an NHL team, but which one? You've been asked also in the comments, what's your favorite song and era from Taylor Swift? Like, people went in on the Taylor Swift part of the Ask CJ prompt last night.
I love a lot. I think All Too Well might be my favorite song. My favorite Taylor song, but I like a lot of them, honestly. I've put this out there before. I'm a Swiftie.
Yes, you have put that out there, and almost every
not
time
to the degree I'm going to spend $2,000 on tickets when she's in Toronto next year, but I do appreciate it. There's a fair bit of Taylor on my Spotify, like most played songs.
Do you have a favorite Taylor Swift era?
No, I don't think I do.
I think the era is basically it's basically like asking what your favorite album is. Like if you have a favorite, yeah.
But I feel like to have a favorite era, it's probably more the people that grew up with her.
Yes.
Like I was already an adult when she came around. So like I feel like I don't have the same attachment in that way. But for some people, it's probably like, well, I loved Taylor when I was in high school, or when I was in college going through this. Like I feel like you have to be younger to have a certain attachment to the era.
Okay. All right. One more thing before we get to DB. So if you were essentially too old for Taylor Swift to appreciate that era or that time, who was like the pop star growing up for you that you were like completely enamored with?
I was never really into pop stars, I would say, like as a kid.
Okay.
Like I was definitely got into like a lot of bands. Like I loved Radiohead for a big period of time, saw them in concert, and they were sort of popular in my high school / university days. But I was never, boy bands were a big thing kind of in that era, right? Like Backstreet Boys were huge when I was in high school, but I just wasn't and Spice Girls, and it's not like, and it's not that I didn't hate those bands, but I wasn't obsessed with them, if you know what I mean. I just kind of, they just kind of existed somewhere out here for me. So I was into more moody kind of music. I went through definitely an emo phase. There's a band called Dashboard Confessional. I really liked it for a period of time, way back when. But the good news is I could still listen to Radiohead. And I don't regularly. I like the Tragically Hip as a kid, obviously. And still, good summer tunes still from the hip if you're ever somewhere on a dock. It still fits right, hits right. Love a band called The National, still going. Saw them in concert recently, a couple weeks ago in Toronto. But I don't know. I never loved the biggest pop star or in the world, I don't think. Maybe Taylor Swift.
Let me change it then. What about Celebrity Crush? That's close enough. It doesn't have to be like a singer. It could be just like,
Celebrity Crush.
You might as well be that.
It might have been Posh Spice, actually.
That's interesting you say that, considering what you said about boy and girl bands.
Well, it's one thing to be obsessed with the music, another thing to be attracted to someone or to have the crush aspect.
I mean, Posh Spice. I mean, wow.
I don't even know. Why am I even answering this? There's just nothing.
Yes, I'm glad you did.
That could come from this.
You like the Spice Girls. I like this. I was legit going to ask you, which Spice Girl were you crushing on the most, and you answered that for me. Posh Spice.
Which Spice Girl would have been your choice?
I mean, oh man, I wasn't a big Spice Girls person growing up, but my sisters might have been into them, and maybe Sporty Spice was cool. I always thought Sporty Spice was cool.
Yeah.
Shout out.
If you were of a certain era, age in that era, though, you would have had an answer to that question.
Absolutely.
Because that was actually a thing that was discussed, and not in I don't know. It was because they were, I think, quite intentionally, maybe the way they were marketed is they're all sort of individual and different, right? And so it was almost like what. Yeah. Anyway, this is preposterous. This might be the end of the podcast.
I love this. We will get to other NHL topics after you could bet that.
Can we get to any so far?
Not really. Oh man. Okay. I'm glad we did that. Let's get to DB and we'll get to some actual serious hockey talk. Let's do this.
It's all part of the game. Yeah, I just gotta go hard.
Welcome to You Can Bet That. David Bastel is here with us. Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all of your gaming needs. DB, we're going to take a look at the Central and the Metropolitan Division. Yeah. Who do you think is going to come out of the Central this year?
Well, heavy favorites, of course, the Colorado Avalanche. They're also Stanley Cup favorites, as you guys know. It's almost like a make goods on Knicks of a last season is what a lot of odds makers are looking at. Currently at Sports Interaction at 226 for Colorado, a 3 for the Dallas Stars, and Minnesota in there with a respectable 6.2, somewhere in that range. Those are the 3 playoff teams, I guess they're deeming them, Chris. I don't know. Is this a year that the Avalanche are healthy and they kind of, show teams what they probably should have done last year?
I think it is. For me, though, they're still down depth class from where they were when they won their cup 2 years ago.
Yep.
That's just a salary cap. It's not mismanagement or anything like that. They lost good players. I know they've made some more moves to try to fill in around the superstars that help them win that cup championship. But I don't see them a tier above everyone. And so, I don't like going with the favorites in this category. So I think I'm more inclined to actually lean toward the Dallas here. If I was putting my thoughts somewhere, it doesn't mean that the Colorado might not win another title ultimately. But I also, as you know, from the themes, I question how much teams really care about winning the division at
Correct.
times, especially those that have had a lot of bigger success. They know what the big picture has in store for them.
So DB, what about the Metro?
You know what? Very similar to the Central. It's all about the Carolina Hurricanes. Same sort of odds, at 2.8. New Jersey's in there at about 3-1. New York Rangers 4-1. Looks like a 3-horse race for the most part, Chris. But you know what? A lot of people pointing at the Hurricanes, saying, you know what, put up or shut up, kind of thing.
I get that for sure. I mean, this is such a toss up, right? It went down to pretty much the last day of the season. for this division last year. This is a big New Jersey Devils podcast because we were in early on their rise. So I want to be true to them. But I wonder about the Rangers with the new coach bump. Peter Laviolette to me is someone who's had a lot of success, especially early in his tenures with his teams. Maybe this is the year that they jump up and score someone a division title.
Between this podcast and the Steve Dangle podcast, there's a lot of New Jersey fans.
A lot of New Jersey love. I know. I get it everywhere.
So.
And every time I come on with you guys, I gotta get myself a Hughes jersey.
I might have to do the same. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. Thank you, DB.
Thanks, guys.
As promised, CJ, hockey topics. Let's start with the Ottawa Senators and Michael Andlauer officially being named the Senators owner. That came late last week. We're still in the early days of the Andlauer era. I keep using the word era. Your thoughts on Michael Andlauer, your thoughts on how he spoke to the media late last week, and the direction that he wants to take the Senators?
Well, it's pretty exciting times in Ottawa. I mean, it's hard not to see the enthusiasm that pops by having an owner like Michael Andlauer. I mean, someone, known in NHL circles, very well respected. I think that's partly how he emerged from a pretty crowded bidding race to get the Senators. If you recall all the celebrities that were in the mix once upon a time for this team, but they end up with a Canadian owner, someone who had a chunk of the Montreal Canadiens for more than the last decade, and who's knows how to do business, I think, with Gary Bettman and at the level of the NHL's Board of Governors. And given how things ended with Eugene Melnyk, who you never questioned his love of the Senators, his desire to want to bring a Stanley Cup to Ottawa. I mean, I think that the fact remains over time, they were on a shoestring budget, that there were cash flow challenges with that organization. They had to make do with less at times in terms of just having a smaller front office, scouting staff, and the rest. And you get the sense with this new group in place headed by Michael Andlauer that they're going to make a significant investment in the team. And it starts, I think, one thing that Andlauer mentioned is he wants to build out the front office a little bit. I think it's going to take some time for that to happen. It seems as though there's a role in some way, shape, or form for Daniel Alfredsson, but another thing that's not, being unveiled here in the first couple of days of his tenure running the team. And then ultimately, I think the biggest question with this organization is can they get a new arena somewhere downtown, somewhere where I think that it's more attractive for people to go to games on a Tuesday night rather than battling that traffic out to Canada and back. And that also is going to take some time. But if you're the Senators right now, this must feel great because there was some bleak days for that organization. But here they are with a lot of intriguing young players, most of them signed long-term on the roster, and an owner who I think is going to up the level and the standard of where they've been considerably.
Well, I guess the only thing you're worried about if you're the Ottawa Senators, I mean, beyond the arena and all that, is the whole Shane Pinto situation. We don't have any more updates on that, do we?
No, because it hasn't changed much, right? Like the dynamic with this one, there's always different elements to negotiation. I don't get the feeling there's any bad blood here or anything. It's not as though one side's saying we'll only pay you this much, and the other side's saying no, it has to be this much. I mean, the standstill is really brought on by the challenges the Senators have. I mean, that alone tells you something, right? The Senators are going to be a team right at the salary cap ceiling this year. And I don't know when that was last the case. I know they've been there at some points during Eugene Melnyk's time as the owner, but it's been a number of seasons since they were, spending, to the max of what they can. And I think that also underlines, the value of a well-heeled ownership group, one with maybe a little bit more cash flow. And I think that they recognize too that you need to build into a winning team to ultimately get the franchise's overall finances back in a stronger place. And so, the Pinto one seems to be more a waiting game. Still don't believe Ottawa is going to be looking to trade him, but they might have to make another move or two in order to free up the cap space to basically get him signed and be cap compliant by the start of the season. So, they still got a couple weeks to do that before a regular season game has been played. But this is a little different. I mean, quite often when you get, we're almost getting towards a week into camp. And if there's an unsigned RFA who isn't around, usually it's because there's a big difference in what, the player thinks he should be paid and what the team's willing to pay. I think that there's a general understanding where the basically where the next contract is, but the Senators got to create room to sign it.
One other Sens question I have, and it's more general, but with Michael Andlauer in place, you had already mentioned that they expect to build out that front office, but I can't help but think of Pierre Dorion and his future with the organization. I'm sure performance for this season will play into it, but I can't help but think of Pierre's future with the organization with new ownership in tow.
Yeah, when you get a new boss, no matter what level you're at, it's a natural question, right? If they're changing the GM, we'd be talking about the coach, because you'd say, oh, this coach wasn't hired. I mean, look at Sheldon Keefe in Toronto after Brad Treliving took over. There was quite a period there where it was uncertain, whether Keefe would be back. I think much like, though, the fact that Keefe did earn an extension and he's got some stability in Toronto, I do think there's a possibility for that to happen for Pierre Dorion in Ottawa. He's going to have to be open to change, because there will be change with the new owner there. The fact that owner has expressed an interest in bringing in and expanding the front office. So he's going to have to be with someone else there. And then I think, what Michael Andlauer sees, now that he's behind the curtain from Pierre Dorion, I mean, this is like another job interview all over again. I mean, this would be a great year for the Senators to break through and make the playoffs, I would think, if you're in Dorion's shoes, just because, he has been the GM that's oversaw the trades of Mark Stone and Erik Karlsson, among other decisions. He's been the GM that's been in charge as they've restocked their prospect pool. But, they're now at the point, I think, that they're expecting results there, even though they had an interesting training camp. I don't know if you took note of this, Julian, but no one, including Pierre Dorion, wanted to make any proclamations. There was no, this team is going to be a playoff team. I mean, I heard Brady Tkachuk kind of dance around the subject that when their camp opened, I saw Dorion himself, who in the past has said things like the rebuild is over. He's been good about giving you that one media clip that tends to hang around for months at a time. But they were a little quieter in terms of what they were saying publicly about what this season, what the expectations are for the season. But I think it's clear, that there's hope that they're really going to be in the playoff mix and ultimately make the playoffs. Tough ask in the division. We know that, but someone's got to do it, and they've got to do it eventually. And so when it comes to Pierre Dorion, I think that what Michael Andlauer, I mean, he's been around the team, so he's obviously got a feel for Dorion. But now they're working together essentially every day. How that goes, and then ultimately what strides the team takes, and even how, for example, Dorion manages the Pinto situation. I mean, all these things I think will go into that calculation about whether he stays on as a GM long term or not. And every day is a tryout right now for Pierre Dorion. And I mean, that's kind of the reality of this business. Not very many people are super stable in their jobs. I mean, it's just a fact of the matter that performance is required to not be looking for work.
Okay, let's go from Ottawa to Calgary. I know I'm in the city, so I'll provide a lot of context here, but I'm still curious about your thoughts. I'll start with the captaincy thing, because it seemed entering the weekend last week that Rasmus Andersson and maybe some other targets, they would look to be the guys at the front of the captaincy debate. Michael Backlund, of course, would be there too. It's just that the contract, that is what is a big thing holding everything up. And now all of a sudden, we hear more and more reports of the discussion being had about him staying. Even his agent confirmed to me on Friday morning that discussion is being had. And now he seems like the favorite. Jonathan Huberdeau went out of his way to say that Michael Backlund should be captain. It really should be him, in all honesty. But I don't think this can happen without a new contract. But there's this growing sense, at least just talking to some of my colleagues, that some kind of contract is going to be coming up within the next few days. I would love to know your thoughts on what's going on in Calgary with how they might be handling this captaincy thing.
Well, I mean, it's really a Michael Backlund more than a captaincy thing. I mean, this is why I do know from talking to front office people over the years, like sometimes they really hate when the whole captaincy debate gets going in the media, because obviously it's a very important symbolic gesture from an organization, but sometimes it can complicate stuff, for lack of a better way of putting it, right? And, really, I found the whole Backlund situation interesting that, he was very clear at the end of last season that he didn't really want to engage in contract extension talks over the summer, just because you've got someone who has a legitimate chance to spend his entire career in one city. And that's awfully rare in the NHL. I mean, that basically never happens. You can understand if you're in Backlund's skates, though. I mean, he wants to win a Stanley Cup, and he probably had a lot of questions at the end of last season about the direction of the organization. He wouldn't be alone for that, and reason to doubt it. And so this decision must be weighing on him, I would think, just because, you contrast the fact that you've been in one place so long, you would be, I'm with you. I think on July 2nd, had the Flames just signed Michael Backlund to a couple year extension, there wouldn't be much debate about the captaincy thing. Maybe they would have given them the C on the same day. Who knows how they might have handled that. But, now you get into training camp and you've got these other players on expiring deals and there's a lot of different sort of factions about ways it could go. I don't think, truthfully, the captaincy is as important as figuring out what they're doing with these players, right? I think one falls in line with the other, but it's all kind of mixed together in this stew now. And so, maybe the fact that those conversations are happening has put on hold the need to stitch a C on someone's sweater for the time being. It'll be interesting to see where it goes, though. The fact that Michael Backlund's open to those discussions, though, I think certainly changes the way that the Flames front office and the coaching staff would be looking at that decision.
I feel as if because of Backlund's contract situation, the discussion of the C and the contract, there's two C's in the situation. They're linked. There's no way you could separate the two now, because if Michael Backlund gets the C, it means he's going to stay for some time. We were talking about in the last episode, you want a captain with some continuity. And while I understand that Backlund has more or less been a de facto captain already in that locker room, I don't know how you feel about having a guy wearing the C and then you're still worrying about his future. I was talking about with a colleague yesterday. It's probably it could be a situation where Michael Backlund, they announce the contract, he holds up the jersey, he turns it around, there's a C on the front. Like, he's going to be that guy for the next few years. But now, with everything kind of going on in terms of those discussions, could you imagine if before the start of the season, the Flames say it's Rasmus Andersson who is the captain? What's the first thing we're going to think of? Oh, then how are those contract talks going with Michael Backlund? We're not going to think of them in a positive light. I think the situation has presented itself. Go ahead.
I was going to say, maybe it's best to just go with no captain till everything's resolved.
But then at that point, you're going back on what you were saying throughout the offseason. When Craig Conroy was hired, one of the first things he said was that there was going to be a captain. You can't have all of that talk in the offseason and say, we're going to have a captain. That's a priority for us. And then you realize the situation is too difficult. And then you say you can't have a captain. Maybe you could, but that would be a very, I don't know if a mess would be the right word, but I don't know if that's the right way to go about things. They're having meetings about this. They're having discussions about this.
You're inadvertently backed into a corner now by your own words, right? Because this is why it's probably best to say as little as possible, as much as we hate to hear that from our side of the job. But the more you say, then sometimes all this gets kind of thrown out on the front line for everyone to kind of have an idea of where the dynamics are, more than if everything was held behind the scenes.
I'll say this. What would be pretty bad? Look, Craig Conroy, first-time GM, great dude. You said that you did not want to repeat with the Elias Lindholm situation with Johnny Gaudreau, and you have all these pending UFAs to start the year, and you have no captain. What does that say for Craig Conroy if he's saying all that stuff and none of that comes to fruition? That doesn't look good. Something has to be done with that.
Right. And I actually noticed that Lindholm confirmed what we said on this pod over the summer, that there was not much talk all summer long.
Thought about you when he said it, brother. I thought about you the whole time.
Not that we needed confirmation. We didn't need confirmation.
But no, I think there are some people who were very quick to think that, okay, Elias Lindholm is leaving, but you were on that train that said, oh no, he's in the middle of all this. I think you deserve your flowers on that, because I think you reported that as accurately as you could. And that's not shade to anyone else. I think you deserve your flowers for that.
Well, and I think he still wants to stay. It's just, are they going to pay him what he's worth? Go in circles. And then now, if you're the team and you start getting this close to the season, whether you're looking at Lindholm, whether you're looking at Nylander in Toronto, perhaps the Winnipeg guys fall in the same position with Scheifele and Hellebuyck, you're like, well, let's see how these guys play now. Because crazy as it sounds, even if we're talking about tenured NHLers with lots of accomplishments already, how you perform in that platform season does typically, to some degree, influence what the next contract looks like.
Okay. The only other big story out of Calgary in the last few days, really, it was really interesting to see Nikita Zadorov speak to the media about his comments on a YouTube show with a Russian journalist about the invasion of Ukraine. There's not many players are speaking out against it or trying to talk about it publicly. We don't have to spend long on this, but I just thought it was interesting that Zadorov did this and he went out of his way to say, hey, you know what? I've been educating myself on this. And it turned into a discussion topic for a couple minutes with us in the media. Randy Sportak from the Hockey News spoke with him exclusively before this all unfolded and got some thoughts from him. But I'm just curious from your vantage point, just the fact that a player would use his platform to talk about this.
Right. And I remember in the early days of the invasion of Ukraine that he stood, he put an Instagram post up, one of the few basically supporting the Ukrainians. And, Nikita Zadorov, I saw that, I don't know if it was Randy's interview with him or somewhere else, but it had mentioned he knows he can't go back to Russia now. Like that when he says these things, it really, there's some ramifications for his personal life there, where obviously the place where he's from, where he's got family and friends still living. And, now he basically lives in Florida in the off season, where there was obviously a pretty big Russian community. But it takes courage to stand up to, in this case, really what I think would be if you're from Russia, if you're an athlete, a hockey player in particular, elite hockey player from Russia, there's a certain pressure to, be on the other side of this. And so I think it takes real courage to stand in the face of your country, your countrymen, probably some of your colleagues in the NHL, have bad thoughts about you, but he's willing to put himself out there for what he believes is right. I mean, hard for me to sit and look at that and say that it's anything other than admirable.
Yeah, not just his colleagues in the NHL too, but he also admitted that there are family members of his who are on the other side of this discussion as well. It's very tough, but also very brave of for Nikita to do what he did. And I came away from that scrum with him. It's weird to say amazed, but I was surprised that it got to that point. But I commend him for his bravery for speaking out on something that means so much to him. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to spend a moment on that. One other thing before we get to ask CJ though, did you pay attention at all to the Global Series, the games in Australia between Los Angeles and Arizona? The Logan Cooley goal that was scored in one of those two games was really sick. But the fact that there were NHL games played in Australia, might have been past your bedtime, admittedly, but it seemed as if the fans were having fun. Would love to know your thoughts on that too.
Well, I mean, Australia, one of the great sporting nations in the world. The Cooley goal is what I saw replayed about 1,000 times, and for good reason. It was a sick goal. It was pretty cool, actually, that both teams also took, a lot of their regulars. I mean, those were two very NHL-heavy lineups that they played those two exhibition games for. Obviously, the teams are trying to use that as a team-building experience to be going that far. I think it was 17 time zones or something like that. So there's, or 17-hour flight, maybe 15 time zones. Either way, it's going to significantly impact, of course, those players and the staff flying all the way back and now getting ready for the NHL season. But, interesting experiment. I know it's been in the works for a number of years, and that there's been an interested group down there that wanted the NHL to go there. I believe it's going to be not an annual event, but something the league, does maybe every couple of years, plan to take more teams down. And I mean, look, the world's smaller and smaller and smaller with each passing year. So it sounds a little nutty in a way, right? Like I'm not aware of a huge amount of Australian fans. I know that, of course, there is a league there. I know we've actually got a couple of listeners of this pod from Australia.
Yes,
but it would seem to me that the NHL has a ways to go in Europe still, to build its brand there. And look, I know there's Global Series games there basically every season. They're taking 4 teams to Stockholm in November. The Leafs, the Senators, the Red Wings, and the Wild are going there and going to play a series of 4 games. But I still think the league could be doing more to grow kind of its European division before, worrying about other parts of the world. But I mean, look, I do. It just makes sense. I mean, the NFL's in London pretty much every week during the season. It feels like. I still believe in our lifetime we'll see something that amounts to an NHL European division. I realize that's not close today. It's not, it's not something that's happening next week. But I think that it kind of makes sense that things would expand in that way over time. Although there's significant challenges, namely the number of arenas, the size of the arenas, and the amount of money fans are accustomed to paying for games, not to mention the travel issues. But yeah, good for the NHL. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know what the legacy of something like that is, right? I mean, you do it once. I mean, maybe you make a few fans, but how do you keep those fans? How do you keep them on the line? I mean, I think that's the challenge. It feels like at times the league goes and plays a couple games and then leaves for a year and then comes back. I think it's hard to keep that going. But I think that the next step, I'd love to see the league have like a European office, like more of almost like a regular presence there. Not even about expansion. I just think there's so many countries in Europe where hockey's either the first or second or maybe third most popular sport, but like places that come to the sport naturally. And obviously lots of players over the years and to this day come from those countries. I just feel like there's an opportunity to be doing more in Europe before we're worried about, parts of Asia or perhaps Australia.
Well, if we were to go to that point, I would love to know what city makes sense in terms of setting up an office, or even, in terms of an expansion team. Like, do you go for London, but maybe why not the Scandinavian countries? Like maybe you set up something in Stockholm as an example. I would love to know what would be the most ideal place to kind of set up shop if you're the NHL.
Well, I mean, the double IHF, the world governing body is out of Zurich. So maybe there might be, I mean, to be honest, I'm speaking off the top of my head. So, but there might be some value.
But it's a good idea.
There might be some value in being close to them. I think London is always a great place to start. I mean, might be the world city, the closest thing we have to a world city. And obviously very easy to fly there direct from either New York, Toronto, where you're going. And then a great jumping off point for Europe. Those are the two that jump to mind, that there might be a strategic value to being close to the IHF, or, I just think you can't go wrong being in London. I actually lived in London, Julian, and when I was younger, and I remember one of the parks I would often go to on the weekend, they actually had a baseball setup getting put up in that park, and it was done by Major League Baseball. And basically for like kids of expats or whatever that live there, you could play. I mean, they don't really have, or at least they didn't at this time when I lived there, a lot of true baseball diamonds, but they basically set up a baseball diamond in a big park. And, and obviously the NFL, I mean, I think we'll see a team in London, the NFL first, frankly, because in a sport where you're only playing one game a week, I think it's actually kind of doable travel wise. Obviously it's not easy, but the fact that, what are they playing, 8 or 9 games there this year? I think they sell them out. I think London's probably where I'd be inclined to put it, but I haven't. This is just us two guys talking that, starting with Taylor Swift, ending up on where the NHL's European division should end up.
I mean, look, that's the beauty of this show. If it was just set to the topics that I think we should talk about, or you should talk about, it wouldn't be that interesting all the time. It's nice whenever like a random idea pops to your head and you go off that. I think that was the fact that you mentioned just having a presence in another part of the world. I think that makes a lot of sense.
Well, and look, there's great news finally, because our pod has been very clear on where we stand on the best on best, and that they've got to get it back going. Based on everything I've heard, it's well down the tracks now to getting, everything's on pace to see the Olympic participation in 2026 in Italy. It sounds like they're going to have another tournament in 2025 before that. I don't know if it'll be called a World Cup. There's a lot of issues. First of all, just timing becomes an issue to pull it off on shorter and shorter notice, because it isn't locked in just yet. But I think there's been some discussion about having it be like a 2-team event or a 4-team event, or maybe just a smaller version anyway of what we saw in 2016, not as many entrants. I think the Russian participation issue is, it's sort of obvious at this point in time, you're not having a tournament with Russia in it. But, there's obviously a lot of high profile Russian players. Anyway, it does sound like we're going to see international hockey getting back on the docket. So I think one flows from another, right? I mean, it's all about trying to build your brand and to find opportunities, frankly, to make money in other parts of the world. Because, the league does do a good job in North America. I mean, there's 32 teams based right across the continent, and, the league is growing and growing and growing, but, there's limitations to that growth in those markets. I think you do have to look elsewhere to try to find ways to do it, but, much easier said than done, just given the cost of staging games on the other side of the globe.
All right. Let's do a quick Ask CJ before we get out of here, Siege. We'll start with a question from Congo Red on Discord. What is your favorite hockey broadcaster catchphrase or sign-off?
I mean, I'm a Bob Cole guy. You know, I still hear Bob Cole in my head. Like that's how hockey, that was the soundtrack of hockey when I grew up and really into my 20s before Bob, even my 30s before Bob was officially done. So, oh, baby, that great Bob Cole. I still think of the 2002 gold medal game men's hockey when Joe Sakic.
Yes.
I love the way that Bob made a call. So I'd have to go. There's so many great broadcasters out there. Some of them are my friends nowadays and certainly colleagues, but it'll always be Bob Cole for me.
Man, there's a lot of play-by-play people in the sport I admire. Chris Cuthbert, I'm a really big fan of him. Hearing him say, "Did you see that?" whenever something crazy happens, I love that. But Gary Thorne, for me, needs to be mentioned in this discussion. Thinking of the times when he called the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup and Raymond Bourque lifting the cup, the 04 Stanley Cup playoffs as well, the 03 playoffs, when he was calling the Ducks. It was, oh God, why am I blanking? Ducks Jersey.
New Jersey,
series.
yeah.
Yes. Sometimes I go on YouTube and I look back at some of those clips and how he calls some of those games. Like Steve Thomas scoring an overtime goal in that series. For me, I go back to that. Like, that's just a perfect call for me. And maybe it's not easy to pick out one specific catchphrase from him, but I have to shout out Gary Thorne. But Bob Cole deserves his flowers as well. Oh, baby. Like, he's got it.
Baby. I
Have
love
to
it.
mention Bob Cole in all of this. Maybe one day we could do a Mount Rushmore of play-by-play commentators. Let's do a question from Meeks. You can go back 10, 15 years and give younger you an insight about current day hockey. What do you tell them?
The best is yet to come. I mean,
that's too vague.
No way. In my view, the game is way better now than it was 10 or 15 years ago. And the individual skill is being, I think, accentuated more. We're seeing Connor McDavid put up 80s style kind of seasons in terms of the numbers, more and more players hitting 15, 60 goals and going well over 100 points. Seeing players come into the league like Connor Bedard, like the way he shoots the puck, you've just never seen anything like it. Really, the closest thing you saw was Austin Matthews, and I feel like Connor Bedard's like the next stage of Austin Matthews almost. The speed of McDavid. I just think the fact that the game is going, I guess if I was going to tell myself what was going to happen, it would be way less reliance on physical intimidation. Still an element of that, even still a place for that. We see it in the playoffs especially, and way more of a skill component to the sport. And I think it makes sense. I think it's only going to keep going that direction too. I think you're going to see almost bigger and bigger players enter the league, but have the skill of what you might think a smaller player can do. I think it's only natural that's how things evolve. So the best is yet to come, CJ.
From I Build Teams on Twitter, will the Sabres tweak their roster before the opener?
I don't know that they'll do much more than what they have. Obviously they have some roster decisions, as all teams do, but this isn't really a time of year where we see a lot of trades. I mean, the one exception might be in Ottawa where they've got to create some room. I think the Sabres are kind of set for now entering the year, and we'll see where they go. We'll see if maybe at some point Patrick Kane might be interested in coming to play for his hometown team. But Kane's still targeting a November, December return. So, I don't see anything imminent for Buffalo other than, getting the roster down to 22, 23 players by opening night and seeing where they're at.
Mark Shag on Twitter. What makes your food take so much better?
Well, because I'm not ridiculous like Julian. I understand that you can combine good foods and they're still good, like poutine and hot dogs. I know a good chocolate bar when I see one.
I have a question for you, CJ.
Julian's picky. That's all I'm going to say. Julian, he's pretty picky with his food. I think that's what stands out.
I have a question. You know what? I got two questions for you. How often do you cook, CJ?
Intermittently.
Okay. When you cook, what type of seasoning do you use?
I don't know if I cook with any seasoning. I mean, pepper. But what is?
I'm moving on to the next question.
What is this? I'm not even sure what you think you just proved. All I'm saying is,
I'm not.
Julian is picky. Julian is picky.
Go ahead.
Julian is a picky eater, and that's where his bad food takes come from.
I just want the record to be shown that a man just said I have bad food takes, but he doesn't put any seasoning on his food. This is your king. Anyway, the last thing is not a question, but this was just posted on Discord. It literally says, this is from 5 Second Pose. Not a question, but a few years ago, Chris did an event in Stratford to raise money for a friend who was fighting cancer. She is getting married in 2 weeks. I think this was put a week ago, so it might be a little less time, but they just wanted to say thank you.
Wow, that's cool. That's cool. I had a great night that night in Stratford.
Nice city. It's a nice time. It's a nice town. It's nice.
Yeah, we just drove up, and John Fitzgerald and I, Kevin Kennedy, who's organized a lot of the Puck Talk events in Toronto back in the day, was the one who arranged it, and basically went on stage and did a version of Puck Talks. And obviously being Stratford, being just outside Toronto, there's a lot of Leafs talk heading into that season, because it was literally about 2 years ago now, or a couple years ago now. It was in the fall, and it was all to raise money for a woman battling cancer. So that's great to know. I actually kept in touch with some of the people I met that night. I met a woman, an older woman who was full of piss and vinegar, Helen, and I would still hear from her from time to time, and her granddaughters. So anyway, it was a good time. I'm happy to hear that.
And this episode was a great time, CJ. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode. We'll have stick taps as well, and other fun stuff to talk about on the next edition of the CJ Show. Hope you enjoyed this Taylor Swift edition with other fun stuff too for our Monday. Hopefully it starts off your week on a great note. For CJ, I'm Julian. So long and peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.